Borodar everyone, it's Mrs. Thomas here, and after a brief hiatus I'm picking up on the great work that Mrs. Hassan started with Litcasts 4 and Inspector Calls. So as mentioned in the intro, these are not designed to replace your revision, and they certainly won't cover everything that there is to know about these characters, but hopefully they might just highlight some key areas or aspects that kind of will kickstart your revision and your recall as you're listening. And you can get these on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you use for your podcasts. So today we are going to be talking about the Inspector Ghoul, the man himself. So who is he? He introduces himself as Inspector Ghoul, a police officer who's come to investigate the background to a young woman's suicide. And of course, having read the play, we all know that he's much more than that as well. What does he actually do? Well, he interrupts this lovely engagement party, this lovely family gathering. He establishes that each one of the attendees, each one of the family members, has done something cruel or unkind to Eva Smith. And he gradually takes control of the situation. And, you know, he is polite, but he is very firm, and he refuses to acknowledge that any of the others in the room are superior to himself. And this really encapsulates the purpose of the inspector and the kind of tone in which we are expected to see him. This idea of equality, social equality. And that's perhaps why many people say that the inspector is Priestley's mouthpiece in the play, because as we know from learning about our context, that Priestley was quite active in the socialist sphere. He was very kind of strong and firm in his beliefs around the idea of socialism, and that is that is then seen in the inspector's actions. So when we first see him, we have this, the light changes. We see the light going from pink to harsher. And that again kind of signifies this idea that this rose-tinted kind of picture perfect world that we've been invited into of the Burlings is about to be shattered because this girl has died and the inspector wants answers. And it also kind of implies this sort of interrogation light, the harsh light of interrogation, which is what he's there to do. He's a man of massiveness, solidity and purposefulness. He's an imposing figure, and depending on the performance, he may not be physically imposing, but that's not kind of what is being said here. He's imposing in the sense of he has this massiveness in the way that he presents himself, in the way that he holds himself, in the way that he talks. So a director could choose to make him also physically quite tall and quite intimidating, but equally he could be, he could be shorter than all of the Burling family men. And I've certainly seen performances where the inspector is physically quite a small man, but still commands the room. And that can have its own sort of effect as well. He insists that he wants to do things his way. So one person, one line of inquiry at a time. And we know then from the third act that gives the possibility of him showing different photographs to different people. It allows them to be able to question, rather than questioning themselves, question the legitimacy of the inspector. He takes his responsibilities really seriously. He says it's my duty to ask questions, and he shows everyone else that they haven't necessarily asked questions of themselves. So he's placed within the play to provide that contrast and to shine a lens, or shine a light really, on the shortcomings of the Burling family through his own actions. And then they describe him as quite strange. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector. So ordinary here could mean usual, like a normal police inspector acting in a normal way. But it could also mean normal in terms of, or ordinary in terms of humanity. Is he somehow superhuman? Is he somehow sort of supernatural in some way? And hence the name Inspector Ghoul. Now it's not spelt like ghoul, ghost, but there's meant to be that semantic connection there. And The word inspector obviously tells us that he's going to be looking closely at things, that he's going to be interrogating people, asking questions, expecting answers. But then Ghoul tells us that perhaps there is something about him that is a little different. Maybe he's got this interest in death, this morbid interest in death. Some people, some interpretations could argue that the inspector's existence is a result of the girl's death. He kind of remains solid, remains purposeful, remains single-minded as the family kind of collapses around him, and nothing distracts him from his purpose. And you could say that he's not particularly empathetic to the Burlings, and he doesn't show them very much sympathy. And you can understand again why when we're thinking about Priestley and the mouthpiece of Priestley. He acts as a catalyst, and this is really important actually. The inspector can be seen as a dramatic device, and we have to remember that when we're talking, especially in essays, we want to be talking about how these characters are constructs used by the author or the playwright to promote certain ideas, ideals, themes, etc. And especially in the case of the essay, we want to be then linking that to context and thinking about what these characters exemplify in terms of the context in which they are placed. So in An Inspector Calls, the inspector is seen as this catalyst. He very much drives the plot on, and he is really one of the major dramatic devices of the play. So he moves the plot along, he controls the pace of events, and he decides the order in which the characters are questioned as well, which when you think about the dramatic tension within the play, that's really important. And he's arguably used to voice Priestley's socialist views and opinions. He represents everything that was changing in society at the time, and within the Burling family he challenges everything that had been the norm. So he shows that big kind of cultural shift that's gone on in society. So the class system, the fact that the class system is perhaps breaking down now, isn't as robust as it was. The lack of social responsibility that was present before and now, when being presented to this audience in 1946 is not as there's not that kind of distance anymore. People do feel more responsible for each other. The clear abuse of power towards people who do not have the ability to speak out or the voice to speak out. And Eva Smith, we have to remember the kind of intersectionality. She is working class and she is a woman, and both of those things combined make her even more vulnerable. Concentration of wealth in the hands of a few at the expense of the majority. The inspector challenges that and kind of questions that. And this is really kind of overt. It's really obvious in this play that he is taking their world and ripping it apart, and doing that through socialist logic. The hypocrisy and narrow-mindedness of the upper classes, the fact that they can't see beyond their doors, and the naivety of the women in the family is quite a nice example of that, and he very much calls them out on their naivety. He highlights all the social injustices of the time, so low wages of a factory worker, the fact that they could be sacked at will, the fact they're treated as disposable items, the hypocrisy of the upper class men who frequented the Palace Bar. And this is important when thinking about Gerald, because Gerald is quite a problematic character for a lot of students. I think students sometimes struggle to think about why Gerald is as much to blame as everyone else. And I think it's important to remember that class divide, and it's important to remember the kind of implied expectations that come with Gerald's help. And we'll talk about that more in an episode on Gerald in any case. The hypocrisy of the upper class men who frequented the Palace Bar, and the hypocrisy of the upper class women as well, who kind of chaired these charity groups but are quite selective about who they give their charity to. That's not the point of charity. Charity shouldn't discriminate, and the inspector kind of highlights that. Now, if we want to get kind of a bit more abstract as well, we can think about the inspector functioning as the chorus in a traditional tragic play. So In traditional Greek plays, you have the performers and then you have the chorus, and the chorus interacts with the actors, with the characters, and comments on behalf of the audience within the world of the play. So, for example, if a character's plotting to kill someone, then the chorus would step in and kind of say, "What are you doing? Have you really thought about this?" Even though the inspector doesn't do as much singing and dancing as a traditional Greek chorus does, he does act. His function in this play definitely sort of fulfills that same role, and the play as a whole very much fulfills the traditional aspects of tragedy. The idea that it's one location, it's one plot line, and the action therefore is concentrated and made more dramatic as a result. And of course then we have the chorus, which is Inspector Gore, and his distance from the family allows him to be able to question them and kind of impose these contrasting political views on them. And one of the more famous kind of moments with the inspector is his final speech. Now, I know this isn't, if you're listening to this in 2023, this isn't in your kind of prescribed extract section, but nevertheless, it's a really important quote, and I think it's really important that everyone is really familiar with it when they're talking about the inspector. He says, "One Eva Smith is gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will soon come when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night." So, as a final speech, this is hugely important. It's the lines that we're left with from the inspector. It feels like it's the culmination of Priestley's views, and the inspector being used as his mouthpiece. But there's lines in here that are quite important. There's links to the Bible. There's kind of biblical links. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other is an exceptionally biblical Christian sentiment, and perhaps links the inspector therefore to that kind of high moral, upstanding idea. And by doing that, very much contrasts with the Burlings and their links to the 7 deadly sins. So that sense of morality is certainly there. The fact that they'll be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. This play was written before the two great wars, the First and Second World War. So that, again, in terms of context, is really important, because in the First and Second World War, lots of these ideals, in particular the class system, was damaged hugely because of the necessity of people needing to go to war, and then the change in mindset because you had people of different classes fighting side by side and saving each other's lives. So that's where that lesson was taught, in fire and blood and anguish. And as a speech as well, we have this idea that he's taken this story and he's widening it hugely. The one Eva Smith is gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us. We're not talking about Eva Smith anymore. We're talking about the entirety of the working class, the entirety of, people who need our help. And you can think about, in modern day, groups of people who might need our help, people who are climate refugees, people who are refugees of war, these sorts of groups of people who, right down to sort of people who need the NHS more often than other people. That is still the idea of society helping those people out, and he's kind of widening that remit and kind of encouraging us to think about society at large, which again shows that perhaps he could be Priestley's mouthpiece, represent the fact that he's representing this very socialist view and very much contrasting with what the Burlings are saying. And there's other lovely quotes throughout. I'll just give you a very quick selection. Things like, I don't play golf. Well, the connotations of golf being more of a middle upper class pastime. The idea of sometimes there isn't much difference as you think. Often if it were left to me, I wouldn't know where to draw the line. He's talking about the differences between respectable citizens and criminals. So that's quite sort of subtle there. We could like a subtle burn, really. Thinking about, again, who draws the line, who has the authority, who has the responsibility to draw the line between who's a criminal and who's not, and why should people from middle and upper class backgrounds be able to get away with things when working class people can't get away with anything, even if they're doing everything right. He's also very harsh. He says, yes, but you can't. It's too late. She's dead. And those repeated very short declarative sentences are stating really harsh facts, which very much contrasts with Burling's sort of waffling speeches before the inspector arrives, with lots of euphemisms and things. The inspector's language contrasts with Burling. So everything about the inspector, right down to his use of language, semantics, rhetoric, it all contrasts with him, again, to show that they are absolute opposite ends of this spectrum of the way that they view the world. And really the inspector is put here to be the antithesis of Mr. Burling and the Burlings as a whole. And also to interrogate them and to ensure that they do take responsibility. You could also argue that his fire and blood and anguish is referring to right at the end of the play, where that phone rings again because they haven't taken responsibility. So even though it would be quite a dramatic way to talk about a phone call, he could also be referring to that. So that's a little bit on the inspector. If you were to write about him in your essays, then again, remember to refer to him in terms of context. So thinking about the fact that he is the antithesis of the Burling family, that he is promoting these socialist views and he's very clear about that, and potentially that he's Priestley's mouthpiece. And also remember that all of these characters are constructs. So the characters don't exist. The author exists, and he's using these characters as tools, as rhetorical devices, as dramatic devices to tell us a story and to express, in this case, Priestley's socialist views. So that's everything on the inspector. I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful. Of course, everything that I've talked about today, all of the notes, all of the ideas are available in the revision resources that your teachers are giving you, and in the revision guides that you can buy really cheaply or that the school has available for you as well. I hope this helps with your revision, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. The music used in this podcast is by Ixon. You can find these and all the other amazing tracks that he does on SoundCloud.